taking it from there, by the end of January of 19, 3 of the parcels were already under contract. So we knew that we needed these particular parcels in order to construct the basin. And during this time, the size and scope of the basin had been constantly changing. So as Steve mentioned earlier, we still don't have a final project or footprint in place, but we're getting awfully close. But we knew that these parcels had to come under contract. We met with the landowners and we had them under contract. And without divulging too much information of the contract, they were all expressly contingent upon funding. So if there's no funding from the state, there's no deal. And the other contingency was that they were all cross-contingent upon each other. So if one landowner got cold feet, the deal was dead. They all had to close in order for this to work. The contract between the landowners was with Blanchard River Watershed Solutions. And again, we're talking by the end of 19, I believe 2 of the contracts were executed in December of 18. And why Blanchard River Watershed Solutions versus another entity? Well, we didn't know at the time what public entity, if any, would undertake the project. So we were, and in fact, in the contracts, they actually say these documents will be assigned to a public entity. We don't know. If the county didn't want to do it, we might not have a deal. If the city didn't want to do it, we might not have a deal. If the Conservancy District didn't want to do it, we might not have a deal. And the nice thing about Blanchard River Watershed Solutions entering into these agreements is that if the deal blows up, we're a tiny little nonprofit. There's no recourse. We are adding an extra layer of protection to the Conservancy District, the county, the city, whoever at the time we did not know who would assume the project, if anyone. So if there was a breach on our end, or if there was a lack of financing, or one of the other landowners failed to close and we had the cross contingencies upon on each other, then we'll take the blunt of the default. We can take whatever's in our bank account, a couple grand. So after we had the contracts in place, we began to contract for the due diligence. We obtained surveys, we ordered the title work, we obtained the environmental assessments, and we obtained appraisals. And if any one of these 4 would have come back with a poor environmental, with surveys of all types of easements on it, whatever it may be, again, we could back out. Thankfully for us, the environmental came back clean, the title work was fairly clean, and we had new legals. So, at some point in mid-2019, the Conservancy District agreed to undertake the project. And we knew that the funding was approved in December of 18 for the acquisition and construction of the basin, and it was going to flow through Ohio Division of Natural Resources, ODNR. So, after reading the 56-page capital improvement guideline, I had some questions from ODNR to make sure we're doing this properly. And on April 5th of 2019, I exchanged some emails with them to clarify general procedural issues and the appraisal process. And I know this is a point of contention. So I'm going to bore all of you with how appraisals work. How does the appraiser come in at that value? So let me explain how appraisals work, because we think, gosh, this is what the value of land is, but let me explain this. The first thing is that ODNR requires under the capital improvement guideline to use an ODNR qualified appraiser, or an appraiser has to go through an accreditation process. And in looking at the list, there was one local qualified appraiser, and that was Midwest Appraisal. So when you appraise land, as a general rule, you don't want a Findlay appraiser appraising land in Cleveland. You don't want a Columbus appraiser appraising land in Findlay. Appraisers who work in the market understand the market better than out-of-town appraisers, and we were fortunate enough to have one qualified appraiser here in Findlay. And in fact, of my appraisal clients that I have, many of them are skittish to go out to Tiffin or Upper Sandusky. They stick local. So that's the first thing we did, is we hired an ODNR qualified appraiser. And I'm going to try to explain how this process works. And understand, I'm not a qualified appraiser. But a couple of things to be aware of. One, two overarching concepts. One, any appraisal must be done in accordance with the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice Act, or practices, or USPAP. Appraisers call it USPAP. That's a guideline. So our judges in the audience, that's kind of like the rules of civil procedure for appraisers. They have to follow a particular guideline when they appraise property. And secondly, a qualified appraiser is required or obligated to determine the highest and best use of the property. So they have the guideline, and then they have to determine the highest and best use. Generally speaking, there's three ways to determine highest and best use. One is called the cost method. So the cost method presupposes that you're going to tear down a building and rebuild it. What's the cost to replace a building? Well, there's no building. This is, the vast majority of this is vacant land, so the cost method is inapplicable. The second way to appraise land is through an income-based approach. How much income can the land generate, or how much income can the building generate? And based upon the amount of income that's generated, you do a reverse capitalization calculation that tells you, based upon the income, this is how much the property's worth, because this is how much you can get your money back over time. And in this particular instance, we're used to, and my clients, most of my clients are used to 6 to 10 grand an acre for farming. That's what most of my clients are used to. Those are when I have clients who are selling farm to other farmers, and the ground is continued to be used as tillable land. The problem is twofold with using the income-based method. One, this isn't going to be used as farm. It's not tillable acres. It will be used as a basin. So we cannot use the income-based approach. And moreover, under the ODNR grant guidelines, it specifically prohibits the use of income-based approach. So now, the third and final method, which is comparable sales. So now what the appraiser does is they go into the community and they look at what were other sales of farm ground for non-farming uses. And if you look at the appraiser came up with 4 comps. The first one, which is the closest to the basin, or proposed basin, is the University of Finley. The University of Finley's land, present day value, sold for $24,130 an acre. They came up with the One Energy turbines on the north end of town. One Energy paid $31,001 per acre. Campbell Soup paid $24,930 an acre. And the new Amazon building sold for $35,000 an acre. Those values on the north end of town were adjusted because they're on the north end of town. They're at least in Hancock County. They're 80 plus acres, many of them are. But they were used for non-farming purposes. And if a company wants to come in and buy farm ground for $35 an acre, they're going to pay $35 an acre. I currently, this is anecdote, but I can tell you that we're probably going to close on a deal in July that's going for $40,000 an acre. And I just executed, or had a client execute a contract for $45,000 an acre. Okay, this is what land goes for in Hancock County when it's not being used for farming. There are also 2 comps that were cited but not used. And what's interesting about these comps is that they were immediately north of the basin, the Fox Run Nursing Home. Fox Run paid $31,525 an acre in 2010, 11 years ago. And then in 2016, they purchased the adjacent parcel for $58,237 an acre. Now, these weren't used because the size of the parcels weren't big enough, all right, but they were cited within the appraisal. So when the appraiser did his research, saw what couldn't use the cost approach, couldn't use the income-based approach, had to use the comparable sales approach, that justified the $27,000 per acre purchase price. One more thing about these appraisers, they have to be reviewed and certified by ODNR's internal appraisal. They were confirmed and affirmed on September 9th of 2009. I'm sorry, September 9th of 2019.